Ever been stuck wondering if you should maybe take that slightly smaller payout now or, hold out for a larger sum later?
Or maybe you've looked at a loan statement and just felt completely lost, like trying to read another language.
Yeah, exactly. If either of those scenarios rings a bell, you've already bumped into the core of what we're exploring today.
hmm The time value of money. And it's exactly what we're going to dig into.
That's right. We've got some really good material here that breaks down this fundamental idea. Think of it as your guide to understanding why the timing of money is just so critical.
Yeah, our goal in this deep dive is really to give you a solid grasp of this. It's an essential concept. We'll unpack why when you get money or when you pay, it truly matters in, well, pretty much all your financial decisions.
We want to maybe highlight some things you hadn't thought about, but keep it clear, keep it straightforward.
Right, no need to make it overly complicated.
So let's dive straight into the basic question here. Why is money you have right now inherently more valuable than the exact same amount promised to you, say, next year? What's going on there?
Okay, let's unpack that. The central idea, the time value of money, it states precisely that. Money available today has a greater worth than the same amount in the future.
Right.
And there are basically two main reasons driving this.
Okay, the first one that kind of jumps out at me is just, well, human nature, isn't it? We
Good.
generally prefer having things sooner rather than later.
That's it. That's the instinctive pull towards current consumption. You want it now.
Mm-hmm.
But just as important, maybe even more so for finance, is the second factor.
Yeah.
The opportunity to use that money, to invest it, and potentially generate more money.
So it's about the potential for growth.
Exactly. It's the inherent growth potential of capital.
The material we're using gives a really clear example. Imagine someone offered you, say, RS100 today versus the same RS100, but a month from now.
Yeah, most people would instinctively take the RS100 right now, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
And why? Because even just within that single month, you could theoretically invest that RS100, even if it's earning just a tiny bit of interest. Maybe it's 6% per year.
Okay.
By the end of that month, you'd have slightly more than RS100, maybe RS100.50. So that RS100 offered later doesn't account for what you could have earned in the meantime.
Right. There's a cost to waiting, an opportunity cost.
Precisely. So this means when we're looking at cash flows, money coming in or going out at different times, we can't just compare the raw numbers side by side.
You have to account for this time element.
You really do.
Yeah.
And it's actually amazing to think this isn't some modern financial invention. Our sources point out that way back, like 5000 BC.
Wow, really?
Yeah, civilizations like the Mesopotamians, Hittites, Phoenicians, Egyptians, they were already charging interest on things they loaned out.
Like what sort of things?
Well, olives, seeds, livestock, basic commodities.
That's fascinating. So interest has been around for millennia.
It has. And there's a great analogy in the source about seeds. If someone borrowed seeds, planted them, grew a crop, they'd naturally return more seeds after the harvest than they originally borrowed. It's a simple agricultural way of showing that fundamental time value, the potential for something to generate more over time.
That's a really clear way to picture it. Okay, so we get it, money today is worth more, but how do we actually, put a number on that difference? How much more?
That's exactly where the concept of present value comes in,
Fair.
PV for short.
Okay, present value.
It essentially answers the question, what is a specific amount of money I expect to get in the future actually worth in today's terms?
So bringing future value back to the present.
Exactly. We're taking that future sum and discounting it back. We use a specific rate to do that, sometimes called the discount rate or return rate or interest rate. They often mean similar things in this context.
It's like finding out the equivalent amount I'd need in my pocket today to be just as happy as getting that bigger amount later on.
You've got it. Now, for a single one-off payment in the future, the calculation is pretty direct.
Okay, what's the formula?
The present value, PV, equals the future value, FV, divided by, now stay with me, 1 plus the interest rate per period, R, raised to the power of the number of periods.
Okay, a PV, FV, 1 plus RN. So the further out that payment's, the bigger N or the higher the rate are we use for discounting?
The smaller that future amount looks in today's terms.
Exactly.
Right. Our source material is a good example. Let's say you expect a future payment of R is 50,000 in 5 years, and you figure you could reasonably earn 6% per year on your money.
Okay, so FV is 50,000, N is 5, R is 0.06.
Right. Plug those into the formula, and the present value works out to roughly R 37,362.91.
So getting 50,000 in 5 years is basically the same, financially speaking, as having just over 37,000 today, assuming that 6% return potential.
That's the key insight for any investor making a decision.
Yeah.
Now, what if it's not just one payment? What if it's a regular stream of payments, like getting a fixed amount every single year?
Ah, okay, like an income stream.
Exactly. That's what we call an annuity.
Mhm.
And calculating the present value for that
Mm.
is, well, it's a bit more involved.
Right, the formula looks a bit scarier. PV equals C, that's the regular payment amount, times this big fraction. 1 minus 1 divided by 1 plus R to the power of N, and that whole thing is divided by R few.
It looks complex, but conceptually, it's just adding up the present value of each individual payment in that series.
Okay, that makes sense.
The chapter uses Shyam's situation as an example. He's set to receive Rs 6,500 every year for the next 8 years.
Yeah.
And let's assume the relevant interest rate is 7%.
Right, so C is 6,500, N is 8, R is 0.07.
Plug those in, and the present value comes out to around Rs 38,813.44.
So Shyam should be theoretically okay with either getting that Rs 6,500 stream for 8 years or R getting a lump sum of about Rs 38,800 today, assuming that 7% rate holds.
Exactly. And for anyone who uses spreadsheets, which is most people in finance, the chapter mentions the PV function in Excel. Super helpful. It simplifies these calculations a lot.
How does that work?
You just tell it the rate per period, the total number of payments, the payment amount per period, which you usually enter as a negative number since it's like an outflow from the perspective of the calculation setup.
Okay.
And then optionally the future value if there's a final lump sum. And importantly, whether the payments happen at the beginning or end of each period. We'll touch on that later with annuities.
Right. Okay, so PV brings future money back to today. What about the other way around? Projecting today's money into the future.
Yes. Future value, FV.
Seeing how much an investment will grow to.
Precisely. Future value lets us forecast what an investment made today will be worth at some specific point down the road, factoring in the powerful effect of compounding interest.
Compounding, that's the key, isn't it? Interest earning interest.
Absolutely. And the formula is basically the PV formula flipped around. Future value, FV, equals the present value, PV, times 1 plus the interest rate per period, raised to the power of the number of periods, N.
FV equals the present value 1 plus RN. Seems logical.
It is. But here's something really crucial to remember. The frequency of compounding matters.
How often the interest is calculated and added.
Exactly. If interest is compounded more often than once a year, say quarterly or monthly, you have to adjust both the R and the N in the formula.
How so?
Well, take an 8% annual interest rate. If it's compounded quarterly, you don't use 8% for R. You use 8% divided by 4, which is 2% per quarter.
Okay, so R becomes 0.02.
Right. And if the investment is for 5 years, N isn't 5 anymore. It's 5 years times 4 quarters per year, so N becomes 20.
Ah, I see. So you adjust the rate to the period rate and the number of periods to match.
You have to. And it can make a really noticeable difference in the final amount.
Yeah.
Because you start earning interest on your interest more quickly.
Right. The compounding effect kicks in faster and more often.
Definitely. The chapter illustrates this really well with Krishna's investment. He starts with Rs. 5 lakhs, the interest rate is 8% per year, and the term is 5 years.
Okay.
Scenario 1, no compounding, just simple interest.
That's easy. Just 8% of 5 lakhs each year for 5 years.
Right. Interest is Rs 2 lakhs total, so the maturity value is Rs 7 lakhs. Straightforward.
Okay.
Scenario 2, annual compounding. Using the FV formula with N5 and R.08, the final value jumps up to Rs 734,664.
Whoa. So the interest earned is Rs 234,664. That extra 34 grand is purely from compounding once a year.
That's the magic of compounding right there, reinvesting the earnings.
Okay, what about more frequent compounding?
Scenario 3, quarterly compounding. Now we use R is your 142,000, 8 per 4, and N equals 20, 5 years, 4 quarters.
Right.
The final maturity value now reaches R 742,974. The interest earned is Rs 242,974.
So compounding quarterly instead of annually added another, what, about 8,000 rupees?
Roughly Rs 8,310 more, yeah, over just 5 years. It really shows how compounding frequency boosts growth, especially over longer periods.
It's a significant difference just from how often the interest is calculated. It really highlights why understanding compounding is crucial.
It truly does.
Yeah.
And again, just like with PV, Excel has a handy FE function. You feed it their rate per period, number of periods, any regular payments, the starting present value as a negative, and the payment timing. Makes it easy.
Good to know. Okay, so we've covered PV and FE. What if we know the start and end values and the time period, but we want to figure out the rate of return we actually achieved?
Now you're talking about the compound annual growth rate, or KAGR.
Key AGR. I've heard that term.
Yeah, it's very common, especially for investments. It gives you a single annualized percentage rate that effectively smooths out all the ups and downs over the investment period.
So it tells you the steady year-on-year growth rate that would have gotten you from your starting point to your ending point.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
It lets you compare different investments on an apples-to-apples basis, even if their actual year-to-year returns were volatile.
Okay, how do you calculate it? Is there another formula?
There is. KAGR equals, take the ending value, divide it by the beginning value, raise that result to the power of 1 divided by n, the number of years.
Right.
And then subtract 1 from the whole thing.
Okay, so n begin, 1, 1. It kind of looks like you're undoing the compounding to find the average yearly rate.
That's a good way to think about it. The chapter gives a simple example. Rs 100 grows to Rs 120 over 2 years.
Okay.
Plug those in, 120, 100, raised to the powers of 1, 2, then subtract 1. It gives you a KGR of about 9.5%.
So even if maybe it grew 5% one year and nearly 14% the next, the overall smoothed annual rate is 9.5%.
Precisely. And yes, Excel has a function for this too, the rate function.
Naturally. How does that one work?
You tell it the number of periods, any periodic payment, PMT is usually 0 for this kind of calculation, the present value, PV, remember to enter it as negative, and the future value, FV.
Got it.
The chapter also shows calculating KGR for mutual fund. Maybe its value went from Rs 10.50 per unit to Rs 12.25 over 3 years.
Okay.
The calculation gives a KGR of about 5.27%.
And you mentioned it doesn't have to be whole years, right?
Correct. You can calculate CAGR for fractional periods too. The example used is a fund's NAV going from Rs 11 to Rs 13.50 over 450 days.
How do you handle the 450 days in the formula?
You just express N as a fraction of a year. So N would be 450 divided by 365.
Okay. Makes sense.
Plugging that in gives an AGR around 18.07%. It's worth noting, though, while you can calculate it for shorter periods, EGR is really the standard metric for returns over a year or more.
Gotcha. Okay, moving on from single investments growing, what about situations with regular payments, like loans? That brings us to EMIs, right?
Yes, equated monthly installments. EMIs are a perfect example of regular periodic payouts. Very common.
When you take out a loan like a mortgage or a car loan, you agree to pay back the same amount each month.
Right. And that payment isn't just interest. It covers both the interest accruing for that month, and it pays down a bit of the original loan amount, the principal.
And figuring out that exact monthly payment is obviously super important for budgeting.
Absolutely critical. And no surprise, Excel has a function, PMT.
Okay, PMT for payment. What does it need?
It needs the interest rate per period. So for a monthly payment, you take the annual interest rate and divide it by 12.
Right.
Then it needs the total number of payment periods. So for a 20-year loan paid monthly, that's 20 times 12, or 240 periods.
Okay, rate a number.
And finally, the present value of the loan, which is simply the amount you borrowed initially.
Makes sense.
The chapter uses Satis's example, RS 30 lakh home loan. The annual interest rate is 6.5%, and the term is 20 years.
Okay, 30 lakhs, 6.5%, 20 years monthly.
Using the PMT function with the monthly rate, 6.5% and 6.5%, his monthly EMI comes out to about Rs, 22,367 rupees per month.
For 20 years.
Exactly. And the chapter also shows how sensitive that EMI is to the interest rate. Even small changes matter.
Carcow.
If the rate dropped just a little, maybe to 6.25%.
Oh, okay.
Satish's new EMI would fall to about Rs, 21,927.85.
So a 0.25% drop saves him over 400 rupees a month.
Yeah, it adds up. Definitely highlights why shopping around for the best rate on a loan is so important.
No kidding. Okay, now flip that around. What if you know how much you can pay each month, say, towards a loan, and you want to figure out how long it'll take to pay it off?
Good question. That's where another Excel function comes in handy, NPER.
NPER for number of periods.
Exactly. It calculates the total number of payment periods needed to fully repay a loan.
What info does it need?
It needs the interest rate per period, again, the monthly rate usually, the fixed regular payment amount you're making as a negative number.
Right, the PMT.
And the initial loan principal, the present value, PV.
So you know R, PMT, and PV, and you're solving for N.
You've got it. The example in the chapter is someone has an Rs, 5 lakh loan. They decide they can afford to pay Rs 12,000 per month. The annual interest rate is 8%.
Okay, 5 lakhs, 12K payment, 8% annual rate.
Using the NPR function with the monthly rate, 8% 12, the payment of negative 12,000, and the PV of 500,000.
What does it give?
It calculates out to approximately 48.97.
So 48.97 months, just under 49 months, or a bit over 4 years to pay off the loan.
Exactly. Really useful for planning or seeing how maybe paying a little extra each month could shorten that loan term significantly.
Definitely. Okay, we've talked about regular payments out loans. What about regular payments in? Like pensions or maybe income from an investment property?
Yes, that brings us squarely back to the concept of an annuity.
Right. We mentioned annuities briefly when talking about PV, a series of equal payments at regular intervals.
Exactly. Monthly, quarterly, annually,
Yeah.
over some defined period. Pensions are a classic example.
And the chapter mentions fixed versus flexible annuities.
Yeah, just briefly.
Yeah.
Fixed means the payment amount is set in stone. Flexible means it might vary based on, say, investment performance, but the core idea is that recurring stream of income or payments.
Okay. And you mentioned there are two main types based on when the payment happens, ordinary annuity and annuity due.
Correct. Let's start with the ordinary annuity. This is where the payments are made at the end of each period.
End of the month, end of the year.
Right. Think of maybe a traditional bond that pays interest once a year, usually at the year's end. To find the present value of an ordinary annuity, we can use that PV formula for regular cash flows we talked about earlier.
Okay.
Or, much easier, use the PV function in Excel. For an ordinary annuity, you set the type argument to 0, or just leave it blank because 0 is the default.
Got it. 0 or blank for end of period.
The chapter uses an example, receiving Rs 5,000 at the end of each year for 4 years. The required rate of return, or discount rate, is 10%.
So C5000, N in 4, R equals 0, 0.10, type 0.
Plug that into Excel's PV function, and the present value of that ordinary annuity is about Rs 15,849.33.
Okay, 15,849. Now what about the other type?
That's the annuity due. Here, the payments are made at the beginning of each period.
Beginning of the month, beginning of the year, like rent payments often.
Exactly. Rent is a common example. You know, think about it. If you get the money earlier in each period,
You can use it or invest it sooner.
precisely. So all else being equal, an annuity due is generally worth more in present value terms than an ordinary annuity. You have that money working for you for longer.
Makes perfect sense. So how does the calculation change?
Super simple in Excel. You use the same PV function, but you just set the type argument to 1.
Okay. Type 1 for beginning of period.
Let's use the same example. RS 5,000 annually for 4 years, 10% return.
Yeah.
But now the payments come at the start of each year.
So C5000, N4, R is 0.0, type 1.
Right. The present value now calculates to Rs 17,434.26.
Whoa, that's about 1,600 rupees higher than the ordinary annuity.
Roughly Rs 1,585 higher, yeah. That difference is purely due to getting each payment 1 year earlier, giving it more time to potentially grow at that 10% rate.
That really drives home how much the timing within the period matters for these regular flows. Okay, finally, there's one more concept that takes this idea of regular payments to the extreme.
Yes, the perpetuity.
Perpetuity. Sounds
Yeah.
like forever.
That's exactly what it is. A stream of constant, identical cash flows that is expected to continue indefinitely. Forever. No end date.
Are there real examples of these? Forever's a long time.
True perpetuities are rare. But the concept is important. Some government bonds issued way back, like British consols, were perpetuities. Some preferred stocks might act like them, or certain very long-term pension promises.
Okay, but how on earth do you calculate the present value of something that goes on forever? It seems like it should be infinite.
You'd think so, but interestingly, the formula is incredibly simple. The present value, PV, of a perpetuity is just the constant cash flow amount per period, C, divided by the discount rate.
Seriously, just PV equals CR. That's it?
That's it. The logic is that as you discount those cash flows further and further into the future, their present value gets smaller and smaller, approaching 0. When you sum an infinite series of these decreasing present values, it actually converges to that simple ratio CR.
Wow. Okay.
The chapter gives an example. Imagine a perpetual bond that promises to pay Rs 10,000 every single year forever, and the appropriate discount rate is 8%.
So C equals 10,000, R equals 0.08.
PV equals 10,000,
Yeah.
0.08, which equals Rs 125,000.
So theoretically, someone would pay Rs 125,000 today for the right to receive Rs 10,000 per year forever, assuming that 8% discount rate holds. That's kind of mind-bending.
It's a powerful concept, and it neatly wraps up the core ideas we've been exploring: PV, FEV, rates, periods, and the timing of cash flows.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground there, from the basic idea to PV, FE, CAGR, EMIs, MPR, annuities, and perpetuities.
We have indeed. It's a thorough look at the mechanics of the time value of money.
So pulling it all together, the really key takeaway here, the main message, is that getting a handle on this time value of money principle is just,
Well, it's absolutely essential, isn't it?
it really is, for making smart, informed financial decisions. Doesn't matter if you're evaluating an investment, taking out a loan, planning for retirement.
Or even just managing your day-to-day finances. Exactly. The simple but really profound truth is that when money arrives or when it leaves, your pocket significantly changes its actual value in today's terms. You can't ignore the timing.
Absolutely. Okay, on that note, here's maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Think about some small, maybe seemingly insignificant monthly subscription you pay. Netflix, Spotify, a gym membership, whatever it is.
Okay.
How does thinking about the time value of money change how you view the total cost of that subscription over, say, 5 or 10 years? Does calculating its present value make it seem different?
That's a great practical application, thinking about the present value of all those future small payments.
Yeah. And beyond subscriptions, what other parts of your financial life savings goals, debts, maybe even just delaying a purchase might look different if you start consistently applying this lens of present versus future value?
A really valuable framework, isn't it, for understanding the true long-term impact of the choices we make with our money.
Definitely encourages a different kind of financial thinking.
It does. So we really encourage you to reflect on how these concepts, PV, FE, compounding, apply to your own situation. Maybe dig a bit deeper into any area that particularly caught your interest today.